This smiling middle school math teacher is accused in a shocking case of abuse, allegedly against his own twin children who are just 6 weeks old. The infants went to the hospital with bruising and broken ribs, allegedly at the hands of their own dad. And not only is it shocking what he reportedly told police when they questioned him about the injuries, but even more shocking perhaps is what he told a reporter with a newspaper about what he allegedly did. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Child abuse cases really strike a nerve because the victims are so young. And in this case, we're talking about twins and we're talking about babies, just 6 weeks old. And for as shocking and difficult as it is to talk about what the suspect in this case is accused of, it's also shocking what he allegedly told police and what he reportedly said to the local newspaper. This is the person who police say is responsible for what allegedly happened to those infants. His name is Reece Sorenson. He's 28 years old. Up until his arrest, he worked as a math teacher at a middle school in Salem, Oregon. Here's his name, still in the staff directory this morning for that school. The local newspaper, the Salem Reporter, who's been covering this story closely, they say he has since resigned from his position at the school since his arrest. Sorenson is also a captain in the U.S. Army. That's a position of leadership. He's an officer. But his most important job, one that police allege he completely failed at, is dad. Reece is a married father of 2 twins, a boy and a girl, and they were just 6 weeks old at the time that this story took place, according to police. The Salem Reporter reviewed the police affidavit in this case, and here is what that affidavit reportedly says. Let's go back to August 10th. Because that is the day that police say they were called to the hospital because doctors noticed something was very wrong with the 2 children that were brought to them. The children were brought to the hospital that day in Salem, Oregon, because according to the affidavit reviewed by the newspaper, one of the infants was having a hard time swallowing. When doctors examined both children, they found those children were not only just bruised, they were severely malnourished. Now, the affidavit says that doctors noticed that the babies had bloodshot eyes, which their parents said was from vomiting. So doctors decided to examine these children further to see if anything was wrong, and this is what they reportedly found. One of Sorenson's children had 10 broken ribs. Doctors noted the babies flinched when anyone got close to them. Now, the girl had bruises around her mouth, and here is what we are starting to learn about what Sorenson allegedly told police at the hospital. His side of the story, if you will. Because he reportedly told detectives that he stuffed a rag into his 6-week-old daughter's mouth to stop her from crying and screaming, reportedly saying that he was tired and was, quote, at his wit's end. As for those broken ribs, Sorenson reportedly said that he put his fist into the child's stomach using his knuckles and force to help that child release gas. He also allegedly squeezed the child 5 to 10 times before his wife stopped him, the Salem Reporter says after reviewing that affidavit. Now, Sorenson's wife, who is not facing charges in this story, it's unclear if she's under investigation, she reportedly said that Sorenson was very rough with the children and that she does not trust her husband to be around the babies alone. I think it's important to talk about just how young these kids are, because not only are they unable to defend themselves, but these children at 6 weeks old, Sorenson's been a dad for a month and a half. That is it. And he already has a reputation in his own home of being too rough with the kids and having a reputation that his wife says she does not trust him to be around the children alone. This is just after a month and a half of parenting. I find that so shocking. Now, even though his wife doesn't feel like it's safe for him to be around children and the list of alleged injuries to his kids that I just told you, Sorenson is out of jail. He was released from jail the following day after his arrest. And according to the Salem Reporter, it was because his charges just did not meet the criteria to keep him in jail longer. So he is currently out, but some of the conditions are reportedly that he cannot have communication or contact with his kids. Now, his charges originally were 2 counts of third-degree assault and a count of strangulation, as well as a count of criminal mistreatment. He is now charged with 5 counts of first-degree criminal mistreatment and a charge of unlawful use of a weapon. Now, Sorenson doesn't appear to be denying much of what I just read to you that police alleged, because he spoke to the Salem Reporter newspaper. He said that he's working to get better, that he started to get help by taking counseling classes after his arrest. So in some ways you could look at that and say that this is someone who is trying to accept responsibility, but we'll see what the legal system says about that when he is due in court next month. He also reportedly told detectives that he has an anger issue and easily gets frustrated with his twins that came into this world a month and a half ago. Sorenson's next due in court September 4th. As for those baby twins, the boy and the girl, they are out of the hospital, according to the Salem Reporter. Joining us now to talk about this is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. Thanks as always for being with us on Law and Crime, though some of these cases that I know we've talked about in the past with alleged child abuse, which is what this one is at this point, it's just they strike such a nerve. And with this story, for me, I think of the age of these kids. And as a parent myself, like, yes, the early days of having a child, they are hard. It's a grind. You're tired. Having twins would be very difficult. But these kids are just 6 weeks old. And then his wife is like, I don't trust him around the kids. He says he has an anger issue. And it just, to me, even if he's saying now, like, I realized I was wrong and all this and all that, like, it just seems like there's something else going on here beyond just, well, I was in the moment really, really angry when it happened.
Yeah, and thank you for having me again on this. And you're looking at the fact that they're twins, and you don't know the precursors before they have an expectation. When they have twins, you know it's going to be difficult. But the reality is this: they're your kids. They're babies. They're 6 weeks old. You should already have been prepared at one point or another that these kids are it's going to be a difficult upbringing, because that's what it is. Parenting with babies is they're dependent on you 24/7, 365. They have you have an expectation as the provider of that for those kids to do what's right for them. And are you deprived of sleep? Yes. Are they sometimes colicky and crying? Yes, but that's what you expected. If you had no expectation of having children, then you should have been prepared for that. But once you have these kids, you have to be the provider. And to see what they did, I mean, this is systemic. It isn't a one-time, oops, I did something wrong. They had one of them had broken ribs. They were flinching when doctors went to their faces. That is, for a 6-week-old child, for a child over a month, already physiologically moving away from a person. That's something that you have to look at and go, there was more, definitely more. And I believe, and is the mom complicit? Yeah, she's complicit in the fact that if she didn't feel he was comfortable being around him, seek help. Oregon has opportunity for help to do that, or something along the lines that if you need the assistance, get it. Don't wait to the last minute. And then all this, the only way they would have found this happen. And fortunately, first responders, your mandated reporters, and they went to the doctor. Law enforcement would never gotten involved in this unless that happened, or if the children were dead, if the babies were dead. That's the next step. But thankfully, at least there is a stoppage of this, but it should never happen in the first place. And preparation is key to have a baby. That's the important part. They're your kid. They're your life's blood. You sacrifice. You don't injure them because you don't like the way they're crying. You don't injure them because, well, I don't know what else to do. No, you do. And if you don't, seek help.
And I think too, I mean, if there's one thing in this story, and it never should happen, but unfortunately there's too many cases where it does. I think of the doctors at this hospital who I guess one of the children reportedly was brought to the hospital, and the story the parents gave was they were having an issue swallowing. And then the doctors just looked and they saw something that just didn't seem right. So they investigate further, and then they made the decision to call, they recognized the issue allegedly, and then they call police who get involved. As an investigator, I mean, how common is it that is the way you discover some of these child abuse cases, that it's the phone call from the hospital, which certainly by the point a child gets to the hospital, it's too late, but still, they're brought to a place where then, you're brought into the fold and the investigation begins.
Yeah, that's usually the way it works sometimes. It's like there will be the 911 call of loud noises or something, or a dispute in the home. But a lot of times the parents, After they've done all of this, and they go say alleged abuse, after they get almost all the damage is done and they then realize they can't do any more, then they bring them to the doctor. And that's the important part of mandated reporting. Prior to, as say, New York State, teachers and doctors would sometimes not report it because it was a family matter. They wouldn't. But now, luckily, we have moved on. And this is important because when they make the phone call, in New York, we have what's called instant response team. So we're going to have a team available that goes right out, which can consist of child services, investigators from the detective squads would go to that hospital and then start their investigation. And it goes back to something. It's fortunate that it was found at the time it was, because now you saved 2 lives because they were going to be dead. That's the fact. I mean, based on what you're seeing is the starvation, the injuries, they were only going to increase because we've seen in domestic incidents when it comes to children and adults, the violence increases. It doesn't really decrease. When they get away with one thing, then they do step B and step C, step D, and that's what it does. So with the investigators, and they get there, and I advocate that we have, and one thing about detectives, at least NYPD, we have specialized the Special Victims Division is a specialized child section. And that's important because when you deal with children and infants, you want people who are specialized in that. And not only that, specialized prosecutors to see, because sometimes, unfortunately, when babies die, they can die sudden death, and a SID. It could be just whatever. But that investigation is important because babies can't tell you anything. Children may not tell you everything. That's why, the deep involvement of medical staff, social work, and specialized investigators and prosecutors for these make it beneficial, because if it is something that, the child fell accidentally, they can determine that. But if there's systemic abuse, we can see that also.
And you talk about the systemic part of it, and all we know at this point is what's been alleged as far as the injuries that the children had when they got to the hospital, and then the mom made some interesting statements about just not trusting her husband around the children alone, which again is pretty interesting considering they've only been in this parenting thing, it seems, for 6 weeks. But at the same time, you have the children. When a doctor would come over to them, they flinched, and we're talking about a little child, so already that kind of motor is going. When they started drinking milk or formula, they were ravenous, is the term that was used according to the Salem Reporter. And then, they were this starvation issue as well. So like clearly something else more was going on than just the injuries at home and what led up to it. But beyond the statements from the wife, how do you go about an investigation figuring out if what we saw at the hospital is just the tip of the iceberg?
Well, that's why you would obviously make a visit to the home. You would either by consent or by search warrant, checking the refrigerator, because when we have ACS, or Administration of Children's Services in New York City, they would go to the residence, police would go to the residence 2 at times, depending on the severity, checking the conditions of the home, conditions in the fridge, general information that you would expect to have. If you're feeding babies, you should have formula or breast milk, wherever is that in the fridge? Where is the bedding? How is the bedding established? Is there bedding? This all comes from, we had many years ago, and this is in New York, the Lisa Steinberg case, and I actually utilize this in my classes and talk about that. At that time, it was sort of just let it go, but now it's great that we get engaged. The problem is we're engaged usually only when it's criminal. And if the mother at that time felt that he was a danger to the kid, there's got to be an alternative or someone she should have reached out to. He actually worked in a school. Wouldn't you talk to the staff or talk to the principal and say, this is a problem? Because now this is a thing. She's borderline complicit in this. If you felt that he wasn't able to be next to the children, and the children were hungry, apparently, based on the information from the doctors that they were ravenous, you're part of it. Because wouldn't you, if you're concerned about the safety and welfare being of your baby, and this is the problem again, was she working? Was she home all the time? These are things that are going to come out and play in the investigation. You're going to ask these questions because you want to get a full detailed analysis of what was going on in the home to determine those facts. I mean, babies don't break ribs. That's the reality. Babies don't break ribs. Somehow that's done by an adult. There's no allegation. This is allegations, of course, but when you talk about the physicality and you're looking at the well-being of the children, the babies, and this is where they're babies, infants, you have to see, and that's why you go based on what the doctor sees too. So that's the analysis you go. You talk to the doctors who are on scene. They give you an analysis there. You talk to the parents. You go to the residents. You do all of these things to determine the facts, the totality of circumstances. We have unfortunately seen deaths of infants, and there's been no criminality. And the only reason why we do that is because we have to really focus on these cases. These are serious, involved cases. And in that, we need to do a lot more. There is this is what happens with babies. They're home. You maybe go outside and that's it. You talk to neighbors, you talk to people around. Do they have daycare? Are they doing anything like that? Those are things you're going to go into that investigation. So then you can determine whether or not there's criminality in this. And based on probable cause, there's been deemed criminality with the treatment of these two infants, these two babies.
Yeah, and according to the affidavit that was reviewed by the local newspaper, we haven't gotten it in-house ourselves yet, but it seems that Reece Sorenson admitted to, there was bruising around the girl's mouth. And the reason for that is, it's wild to think that someone would do this, even if you don't know anything about parenting, that like put a rag in the baby's mouth to try and like quiet her because he was, quote, at his wit's end, which is insane if that's actually what it is, like an insane, reasonable, reasoning to do that. But then at the same time, I think, and I'm not making an excuse for him, but there's a lot of people, you're handed a baby a couple days after you go to the hospital, and then it's very easy to get overwhelmed. Where is the line between this is someone who just does not know how to take care of someone, and then on the flip side of it, that this is a case of child abuse?
Well, this is child abuse. I mean, based on what you're getting, and that's the determination. When we talk about children, there is physical punishment that happens, a slap on the butt and things. There is allowable physical punishment sometimes to children. To babies, though, shoving a rag down their throat is beyond the pale. And I think the reality is he's 28 years old. We're noticing more and more younger people have inabilities to handle situations that are stressful. And he's a teacher. He was in the reserves. It's amazing that when he comes to his social life, he can't control it. He doesn't know how to handle it. We're seeing this more and more with younger females in their 20s. They have not understood. They have not grown up. They're not mature. My parents had me at a very early age, and they handled things. And now it seems to be more and more, and comes with abuse a lot of times. People in their 20s and early 30s do not how to handle, many of them, not to say everybody, but many of them don't seem to be able to handle stressful situations, so then they act out physically. And in this case, shoving a rag down your baby's throat, or withholding food, or breaking their ribs. This is something that, I guarantee you with the ribs, he's probably shaking the baby to shut the baby up. And luckily, the babies are not dead, because I'm telling you, this was going to happen eventually. And we would have a double tragedy. And then we would say, what happened? The benefit is, on their part, positive or negatively, they went to the doctors, and the best thing the doctors did is report it to the authorities, report it to the police, that what they saw, what their prognosis is, and what their analysis is.
Yeah, and he was a captain in the U.S. Army Reserve. Yeah. So this is an officer who carries responsibility over people who are enlisted, maybe a lieutenant underneath him, and so this is someone with responsibility and in the classroom as well. It's the disconnect between, I guess, being a math teacher in a middle school and then having that type of responsibility, even in the reserves in the military. That's what really stood out to me with this story. Now, it does appear that he spoke to a local reporter and said, "Hey, I realized I was wrong. And it's easy to roll your eyes at someone saying that after it. And so, and I certainly do in a lot of ways. But you've seen, what is for him, and I guess the legal system, if someone at least admits their faults in it and they're moving forward, how could that come into play with what a sentence could look like if this goes to trial or some sort of plea deal is worked out?
Well, we've seen numerous times when there's contrition or admissions of guilt, there will be some sort of way of rehabilitation where the judge may order visits by children's services to the residents on a regular basis to make sure they're on point with whatever they need to do. And he needs some therapy. That's great, all well and good. But this isn't a one-time oops thing. That's the problem. This is not a one-time oops thing where babies flinch at the sign of someone coming toward their face, or there's bruising around their face. Could it be possible it was a one-time thing? But starvation, alleged starvation, or these children seem to be malnourished, that is consistent. That is continuous. So it's, oops, maybe he could be upset the fact he got caught, and we've seen that happen before. Yeah, I did something wrong. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. But this seems to be systemic and complicity by the mother. And that's the other thing. It isn't a one-time thing where the baby got injured by an action that either one of them did. This seems to be a persistent and consistent situation that was going on with the babies. He can say what he wishes to say. The court system, obviously, and one thing about children's services, they rarely take custody from the parents unless they see egregious, violent type of abuse toward the children. That would be up to the courts, whether they put them in foster care. But I'll tell you this, many times they'd rather keep the children with the family under extreme supervision. That may be what the case will happen. His contrition, I made a mistake, but this is not a mistake. This is consistent. And deep psychological help, counseling for them, great. But now what's going to happen is, how long is that going to stay for? 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? And will he revert back to his ways again? And that's the thing you have to look at. Because we've seen people, I'll never do it again. And domestic situations, we see it all the time. I will not do it again. The first time they do it, they smack their domestic partner. I will tell you now, that always consistently continues onward. And that's the thing we have to be concerned about.
Yeah, and to this point, our understanding that his wife, the mother of the twins, she hasn't been charged. We'll keep an eye on this story. It seems like he admitted to a lot at the hospital, or at least talking to police. And I've seen, we don't have the interrogation video or the body cam video of how that conversation went down, but I've seen a lot of body cam video where, the detective will say, hey, if you admit to this, like in trying to get some sort of information, I'll go to bat for you and this will help you out. How, and not necessarily in this case, but just in general, that type of cooperation, even when it's admitting to something horrific, like how far does that go for you in what your sentence may be or how the case plays out?
Well, that's the thing. When you do these interrogations, the admission is one thing. You could admit to something, but we want to make sure it's clarification that it was done obviously voluntarily, intelligently, and knowingly, this confession. So you really make sure that you get as much detail as possible. I did what I did. What does that mean? Show me. We'll do a lot of things like that. And, when it comes to interrogations, I don't want to tell everybody our secrets, but the reality is this is a case, the only people who know what really happened is going to be the parents and what the doctors saw. The babies cannot talk. The injuries that the baby sustained, we'll get the information, but we have to clarify how those injuries took place. And the more detail we have, the more information that we have during that interrogation or questioning. So I don't know how the questioning went. Was he in custody? Did it happen at the hospital with the when he's just cooperating with he's not in custody? What questions are asked? These are things that will come into play, and the defense can deal with that part. But when we talk about the care and welfare of the babies and to charge criminality, we want to make sure everything is done. We want to make sure that if the injuries that were sustained by the babies is consistent with what he is telling the person who we're talking to, either for an interview or interrogation, is what happened. And that's beneficial because now we can tie that in. And and I go back, as contrite as he is, and we could utilize that in part of our techniques and stuff with interrogations. But and that's the one thing as a detective, and one thing one of my partners would never do is infant cases. Refused, absolutely got refused, because he would just get so angry. We have to really separate the sentiments and feelings we have to getting this investigation done thoroughly without any bias. And that's the one thing it's hard to do, but we have to, because we want to make sure that criminal case does not show any biases by investigators, either pro or con, to whatever happened to that incident. We want to make sure we get all the facts. The totality of circumstances will lead us to that through that investigation, determine guilt or innocence of a person that we're looking at or subject.
Yeah, no, and this is just such a frustrating case, and I mean, it's every kind of a negative emotion you can think about when you just read through all of it. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, we do appreciate your time, though, helping us talk about this, because these cases tough to talk about, but very important to talk about as well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.